All right, so welcome back to Goal Shack, the show that brings you all the best insights and analysis from the Hyper League. And today we're diving deep into a really intriguing match from the first match day of the Clausura season, Powerade versus Europa.
Yeah, you got it right. It's the closer season. We're not messing around with any friendlies here.
Yeah, exactly. Right into the thick of it. And, we've got some exciting stuff to unpack here with the Powerade scan vision stats. So let's just jump right into it.
That's right.
Everyone's familiar with the Hyper League, the setup. We've talked about it a lot. But, for those who are just tuning in for the first time, what is it about the Hyper League that makes it so unique and so compelling to watch?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there with the word compelling, because it's the level playing field that makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
These are teams that in a normal league structure wouldn't be coming up against each other, and yet here they are battling it out.
Yeah.
You get these really balanced duels, and I think that's one of the most appealing things about the Hyper League.
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked about it before, but this is a real hotbed of talent.
Yeah.
A lot of these players are looking to make their mark on European football, and this is like a prime stage for them to do it.
Right, and the exposure is huge.
Yeah.
Scouts from all over Europe are watching these games, so it's a really exciting environment for these young players.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into the specifics of this match. Powerade taking on Europa, final score, Europa 4, Powerade 1. So a pretty convincing win for Europa on paper.
Yes, a convincing win, but as we always say on Goal Shack, we want to dig a little deeper than just the scoreline.
Of course, of course.
So let's break down how those goals came about.
Yeah, let's do it.
Powerade's only goal came from Suleiman in the 59th minute for Europa. We had Eduardo Prieto opening the scoring right after the restart in the 46th minute, and then player 21, the mysterious player 21,
Well, I'll find out who that is.
bagged himself a brace in the 50th and 55th minutes. And then to wrap things up, we had Marie scoring in the 65th minute.
And looking at that score progression, it's really that second half where Europa just took control.
Yeah, absolutely. That flurry of goals, those 3 goals in quick succession in the second half really put the game beyond Powerade.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now, possession stats also paint a pretty clear picture. Europa dominated the ball 58.5% to Powerade's 41.5%. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting. Despite having less of the ball, Powerade actually outshot Europa 19 shots to 10.
Now, that's a classic case of, possession doesn't always tell the whole story.
Right.
And I think what we see here is that Europa were much more clinical, much more efficient with their chances.
Yeah.
They had 10 shots, 7 of them on target. That's a 70% accuracy rate.
Yeah.
Whereas Powerade, 19 shots, only 5 on target. So, they were taking shots, but maybe not from the most advantageous position.
Yeah, maybe rushing things a little bit. Maybe a little bit desperate.
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, we'd have to look at the shot map to really get a sense of where those shots were coming from.
Yeah, for sure. But it's definitely an interesting point that, despite having less of the ball, they were still, trying to create those chances.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to, maybe their tactical approach. Were they trying to hit Europa on the counter? Were they trying to play a more direct style of football?
Yeah, and maybe they were also forced into that a little bit by Europa's dominance of possession.
That's right. That's right.
Now, one thing that wasn't too dissimilar was the passing accuracy. Powerade, 81.9%, Europa, 82.9%, so
Yeah.
pretty close there.
Yeah. And that's interesting to me because, you might expect with less possession that a team would be a little bit more loose with their passing, but Powerade were actually pretty tidy in possession.
Yeah, maybe a sign of, some good composure under pressure.
Yeah, maybe so. Or maybe, they were just picking their moments to pass the ball carefully rather than, forcing things.
Yeah, really interesting. All right, let's talk about those key moments, the ebbs and flows of the match, as you mentioned. That second half was really where Europa turned it on, but that first half was actually pretty closely contested, scoreless for the first 35 minutes.
Yeah, the opening exchanges were pretty cagey. Both teams sort of feeling each other out. But then right on the stroke of halftime, Europa managed to sneak one in.
Yeah, and that goal right before the break can be such a momentum shifter.
Oh, absolutely. It
Yeah.
gives you that psychological edge going into the second half.
And then, as we said, those 3 goals in quick succession for Europa in the second half really killed the game off.
Yeah, that was the killer blow.
Yeah.
Powerade just couldn't recover from that.
Now, substitutions always play a part in how a match unfolds, and both managers made some interesting changes. Europa made a triple substitution around the 35-minute mark.
Yes, and I think that was a real turning point in the game. game. Those fresh legs, those new ideas coming on really seemed to revitalize Europa.
Yeah, and then they made further changes around the 51st minute.
Right? Just sort of keeping things fresh, keeping Powerade guessing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Powerade brought on Suleiman at halftime for Eskenazi, and that obviously paid off with Suleiman getting on the score sheet.
Yeah, that was a good move from the Powerade manager, recognizing that they needed a bit more firepower up front.
Yeah. And then they made a flurry of changes around the 56th minute, but by that point, the game was pretty much out of reach.
Yeah, too little too late, I think, at that point.
Yeah, maybe. So, all right, let's get into some individual performances, starting with Powerade.
Okay.
Suleiman, as we mentioned, came on and scored their only goal.
Yeah, a good impact from the substitute, showed his poacher's instinct.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Pablo Moralea had a really interesting game. He had 7 shots in total. Seems like he was really trying to make things happen.
Yeah, he was definitely Powerade's most active attacking player. He was involved in pretty much everything they did going forward.
And it seemed like he was their main threat from set pieces as well, taking free kicks and corners.
Yeah, he certainly had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Isaac Marte was another player who caught the eye, 5 shots, and he also provided the assist for Suleiman's goal.
Yeah, Marte was a real live wire.
Yeah.
He was always looking to get in behind the defense and cause problems.
Yeah, and we also saw Sahil Ezrali get on the score sheet with a headed goal from a corner right at the end of the first half.
Yeah, a good goal from the defender,
Yeah.
Always nice to see a defender chipping in with the goal.
And then in goal for Powerade, we had Pau Jimenez. He faced 7 shots on target and managed to save 3 of them.
Yeah, so he was kept pretty busy. Yeah,
Sure.
and he did make some important saves.
Yeah. All right, now let's turn our attention to Europa.
Okay.
Eduardo Prieto opened the scoring for them with a well-timed goal right after halftime.
Yeah, that was a crucial goal. Yeah, it really set the tone for the second half.
Yeah, and then, of course, player 21 with the brace, 2 goals in quick succession in the second half.
Yeah, player 21 was the star of the show.
Yeah.
A real clinical finisher.
Yeah, those 2 goals really took the wind out of Powerade's sails.
They did.
And then Otmer added the 4th goal for Europa. Seemed like he was a constant threat throughout the match.
Yeah, Murray had a good game.
Yeah.
He was always looking to run in behind and stretch the Powerade defense.
Yeah, now Adrian Torres deserves a mention as well. He provided 2 assists in the match, 1 from open play, 1 from a corner.
Yeah, Torres was the creative spark for Europa.
Yeah.
He was the one pulling the strings.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in goal for Europa, they actually had 2 goalkeepers. Aizon Vega Casares kept a clean sheet in the first half.
Yeah, he did. Well, he looked solid. And then Alex Garcia came on in the second half and faced 2 shots, saving 1 of them.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of the more tactical stuff here. And this is where the Powerade Scan Vision stats really come in handy. We've got data on the average positioning of players for both teams across the match and also broken down by half.
Yeah, this is where we can really start to analyze, how the team's set up, how they approach the game.
Yeah, exactly. So were there any noticeable shifts in positioning throughout the match? Did one team start with a higher defensive line and then drop deeper as the game went on? Anything like that?
Well, without actually seeing the visual representation of the data, it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But, we can speculate.
Of course.
Example, if we thought that Europa's average positions were much higher up the pitch in the second half, that might indicate that they were pressing more aggressively, trying to force the issue.
Right, or maybe Powerade's defensive line was deeper in the second half as they were trying to protect their lead.
Yeah, exactly.
Now we also have data on passing distribution. So who are the key passers for each team? What were their preferred passing combinations?
Yeah, this is really interesting stuff because it gives you a sense of, how the teams were trying to build their attacks.
Right. So did Powerade, for example, focus their play through a particular player even though they had less possession overall?
Yeah, and did Europa's slightly higher passing accuracy translate into more dangerous attack?
Yeah. Now, the key pass leaders for Powerade were Juan Camilo and Pablo Moralea. And for Europa, it was Gabriel Mari and Eduardo Prieto. So these are the players who were really creating those goal-scoring opportunities.
Exactly. And it's interesting that, both teams had a couple of players who were standing out in this area. It wasn't just one player dominating.
Yeah, and when it came to crossing the ball into the box, Pablo Moralea was the main man for Powerade, and for Europa, it was Adrian Torres.
Right. And their crossing accuracy was actually identical, 33.3%.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily the quality of the crosses that made the difference, but maybe the movement in the box or the finishing.
Yeah, exactly. A good cross is only as good as the player on the end of it.
All right, now fouls are a part of the game. And Isaac Marty for Powerade and Eduardo Prieto for Europa were the players who committed the most fouls in this match.
Interesting. It's always worth looking at who's committing the most fouls because it can tell you something about their role in the team or their style of play.
Right, so for a forward like Prieto, a high number of fouls might suggest that he was pressing really aggressively, trying to win the ball back high up the pitch.
Yeah, or maybe he's just a bit of a hothead.
Yeah, could be that too.
You don't want to speculate too much.
Of course not. Of course not.
But yeah, it's an interesting stat to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Now for Powerade, the designated free kick takers were Pablo Moralea and Suleiman.
Okay, so they have their specialists for set pieces.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that makes sense. You want to have players who are confident and capable from those situations.
Absolutely.
Now, when it came to interceptions, Pablo Moralea led the way for Powerade, with Gerard Ampuero, Adrian Torres, and Daniel Diano being the most successful for Europa.
So it seems like Europa were a bit more proactive in their defending. They were reading the game well and anticipating passes.
Yeah, and that could be a sign of good organization, everyone working together to cut out those passing lanes.
Absolutely.
And looking at recoveries, Powerade's goalkeeper, Pau Jimenez, had the most, which is, not too surprising.
Yeah, goalkeepers often have a lot of recoveries, when the opposition are shooting from distance.
And for Europa, it was Aizan Vega Casares and Eduardo Prieto who stood out.
Interesting that a forward is up there in the recoveries.
Yeah, it suggests that he was working hard defensively, tracking back and helping out his team.
Yeah, definitely a sign of a good work ethic.
No, we also have data on dual success rates. So who was winning those individual battles, both on the ground and in the air? And Isaac Marty and Gerard Ampuero were highlighted as key duel winners in this match.
Yeah, duels are so important, because they're often the little moments that decide who wins possession, who controls the game.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, we have some data on set piece efficiency. Powerade scored 1 goal from a corner.
Okay, so they were a threat from set pieces.
Yeah, and set pieces can be such a crucial part of the game, especially when the schools are close.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A well-worked set piece can be just as dangerous as a flowing attacking move.
Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the Hyper League as a whole. Even though the scoreline was 4-1, a pretty comfortable win for Europa, we saw that in certain areas, the match was actually quite closely contested. Possession was relatively even. Passing accuracy was very similar.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to the competitive nature of the Hyper League. You're not going to see many blowouts in this league.
Yeah, and I think the individual performances that we saw from both sides really highlight the level of talent that exists in this league.
Absolutely. There are some really exciting players coming through.
Yeah, and this match was a great advert for the Hyper League. It was entertaining, it was competitive, it was full of individual brilliance.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So just to wrap things up then, a convincing win for Europa, but Powerade showed some signs of promise, and overall it was a really entertaining match.
Yes, a great start to the Clausura season.
So as we head into the rest of the season, what are some of the key things you'll be looking out for?
I'm really interested to see how these teams develop. Which players will step up and become the real stars of the league.
Yeah, and how will the tactical battles evolve? Will we see any new trends emerging?
Yeah, and, can Powerade build on some of the positive things they showed in this match?
Yeah, definitely lots to look forward to.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us on Goal Shack, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the Hyper League.
See you then.